Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
We're going on week 3 of our month of anthologies, and this week I picked the film. This is a movie that had been on our list forever. It's a film that I had seen, I think, back during one of those months before we were doing the podcast when I would, on Halloween, try to watch a horror movie a day. We're going back a little earlier than we usually do. This is a 1945 British anthology horror film, Dead of Night. It is a bit rare because during this time, horror films were generally banned from production in Britain. At least they were during the war. This film got produced, I guess it was just after the war, right? 1945? I'm not very good with history.
Me either.
Yeah, so we're just going to pretend I know what I'm talking about. Made by Ealing Studios. And the reason that I chose to watch it originally is this has very good critical reviews. Good reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. It has a lot of 30s and 40s British stars in it. Some people who are quite famous for the time, back in these sort of glamorous Hollywood times. It is in black and white, so it's a movie that Craig doesn't usually choose to watch. But we did pretty well the last time we watched a black and white movie. I think that was way back, was it Eyes Without a Face? Is that what we saw? That might be the last one we saw, that French movie. And I think you ended up enjoying that, thought it was suitably creepy. We sure liked it. This one I remembered when I watched it years ago being pleasantly surprised. It ended up a little bit darker and a little more sophisticated than I thought it would be for a horror film of this era. And in watching it this time around, I think I feel the same way. I was really happy to put it on the docket. And I figured the only way I could get it on the docket here was if I snuck it in on Craig during our horror anthology month. So here we are. I don't know, man. I'm sorry. Does it sound like I'm trashing you or something?
Yeah.
I just know. I know you don't like these really old, or at least you don't tend to seek out these really old horror films. And you've admitted to me in the past that black and white even just isn't really your thing. Maybe I'm selling you a little too short here. I'm just anticipating how you might feel about it. But maybe I better just let you speak for yourself.
Well, I mean, you're not wrong, but to say that you have to sneak it in, that's bullshit. Like,
all right, fair enough. Well, it's not like you put up a fight.
I never say no. I never say no. I'm not going to watch this.
That's true.
But you're right. You know, I don't typically watch stuff like this. That's not to say that I don't know. I just don't really seek them out. But there are movies like To Kill a Mockingbird is one of my favorite movies. I love that movie, and it's old and in black and white. I like The Wizard of Oz. You know, like I like
it starts
some
out
old,
in black and white.
I know. I like some old Hollywood stuff. The original of Mice and Men. I
Casablanca,
really
probably.
I don't know if I've seen that one, but you know, it's I'm willing to give them a shot. I don't write them off outright just because they're older.
Okay,
but this, I didn't love it.
All right, fair enough.
It felt really old. The style of acting is fine, but it's very old Hollywood. There's something that's a little bit more, and I say Hollywood, this isn't made in Hollywood, this is a British film, but it feels very old Hollywood, and that the acting style is just a little, I feel like today we anticipate a little bit more authenticity, like people acting like people in the real world, whereas in old Hollywood and in this movie, it feels very much like actors. In fact, this feels much to me like a play.
Yeah. Well, it's very presentational, right? The
Yes.
acting style back
Right.
then. You're right. It's sort of in between realistic but presentational, much like a stage actor is, right? I suppose so.
Right. Which again, nothing inherently wrong with that. Just not really my cup of tea. And this movie, I mean, I totally see. And I'm sure that you have done the research and will inform me on all of this, but I see how this is a precursor to all of these anthology films that we love. But in being from 1945, for me, in 2022, it's just a little too tame.
Right.
And
yeah, it's not going to scare the pants off you, that's for sure.
No, I didn't find it scary at all. That's not to say that the ideas weren't clever And if I read them in short story form, I think that I would think that they were clever. But watching them play out in film in this kind of presentational way, it just, I don't know. It felt like something I would watch with my grandma.
It probably is something you'd watch with your grandma. I mean, to be fair, right?
It reminded me of when I was a little kid and I would go out to my grandparents' farm and they would only have, like the 3 network channels, and we would sit and watch like Bonanza or something like that. It felt like it was for old people.
well, first of all, I think many people credit this movie as being maybe the first horror anthology film, or at least one of the first films that have this format of a wraparound story and these Twilight Zone-y tales in the middle. And most of them are based on short stories. In fact, one of them is based on an H.G. Wells story, and not the one I thought it would be, actually, when I went back and looked it up. But yeah, they're probably very good literary stories, but told in this way with the constraints of the time period, I think, what was acceptable on screen, what was not. And like you said, also just sort of the technical and acting, just the way movies were done. They were generally more for all audiences back then. You couldn't do films that, or at least you couldn't do films and expect to make any money out of them, that were a little too narrow in their focus. And this is right at the time of the Hays Code in Hollywood. Britain had the same thing. Where, there were just things you couldn't say and do in movies. You could imply a bit, you could kind of use coded stuff. And there's a little bit of that in here, slyly stuck in. But on the whole, you don't even get like the ghostly scares that you get. And there are films actually from this period that do manage to become creepier and have some of those ghostly scares despite it all. This film just doesn't even really attempt it. This is like a Twilight Zone episodes, I think.
Yeah, that's what it feels like.
Part of what makes it a little tedious at times to sit through is because the ending's a mile away because you've seen these stories 1,000 times since then.
Right.
So most of them don't feel terribly original, although maybe they felt more original at the back in 1945.
Right. I mean, even the twist, like even the frame story has a twist, but it's so clearly projected right from the beginning that you know exactly what's going on. So there are no surprises.
Honestly, it's almost like they're not even trying, right? I mean, like you said, it's kind of like they discuss it during the framing story, and then it ends up being kind of more or less what they thought it was, or at least what one character thinks it is.
Right. All right. Well, unless you have a history lesson for us.
I'm not going to launch into a 15-minute, thing on horror comics or the filmmaking of the 1940s, if that's what you're anticipating. No, you just want to dive in.
Good. I was going to a nice change of pace, I suppose.
Oh, well, you can introduce the movie next time.
I will. Thank you very much. But no, the reason I say we should get into it. Okay, first of all,
there are a lot of stories.
There's a lot of stories. You said you would originally pick something else, and you changed your mind and said, don't read anything about this in advance, which, I appreciate that warning. I like to be surprised. I don't like to have surprises spoiled. So I didn't read anything about it. But right before watching it, I did go to the IMDb page just to kind of, see what it was rated, which it's not, see if I recognized any of the actors, which I didn't. And, but one of the things that I was excited to see was that it was only an hour and 17 minutes long. And then I pulled up the video and it was about an hour 40, I think.
Yep.
So as it turns out, the people who distributed the American release decided that the original European cut was too long, and so they cut out 2 of the segments, which led to some confusion in American audiences because in the finale of the movie, things converge, and it was confusing, and I can imagine. Why I would have been very confused, but. What we watched, I believe, is the original European cut, and so it has all of the stories, and there are a lot of them, and I want to talk about all of them, but we're going to have to move through them pretty quickly if we want to keep it at about an hour. So the Wraparound Story, there are long opening credits, like annoyingly long. Then you see this guy, his name is Walter Craig, and I think they call him Craig most of the time. He drives up to this nice country estate, and as soon he drives up to it and he stops in front of it and he looks and he's got this very puzzled look on his face. Like you can tell already he's feeling like something is off or strange or whatever. And he's greeted by a guy named Elliott Foley. It was kind of difficult to keep up with some of the dialogue, and I found myself pausing and going back a lot. Is Walter the architect of this?
No, well, he's an architect. I don't know if he's an architect of this house, but they want to do some renovations on this house, so that's why he's been called, yeah.
So he's there for like a consultation. And Elliott brings him in. You can just tell right from the beginning, it's like he's experiencing deja vu or something. Like he's familiar with the house. He's familiar with the people there. Mrs. Foley, which is Elliott's mother, greets him and brings him into this parlor where there are several people gathered, and she introduces him to the rest of the guests. There's a Mrs. Joan Cortland, who is, I would guess, kind of a younger, middle-aged. She looks like kind of a woman of high class. She's got kind of this dark updo, pretty, whatever. Then there's a Dr. Van Straten, who is this heavyset, bald doctor with glasses. I think he's German or something. He's got an accent.
Yeah, he has that very stereotypical doctor psychology.
Very Sigmund Freud or something. I don't know. Then there's a guy named Hugh Granger, who is a race car driver. He's tall, dark, and handsome. And then there's a girl named Sally, who's young, probably in her late teens or very early 20s, but she's obviously played young.
Yeah.
And he's acting weird, and he's like, oh, you're all still here, so it isn't a dream this time. Like I said, like it's just so clearly projected. Like as soon as he says that, you're like, oh, he's been through this before. And they keep reiterating. He keeps talking about it, and he keeps predicting things that will happen, and they keep happening.
Dr. Van Straten, you're a psychiatrist. You always treat me. You'll treat me now, won't you?
Must forgive me, I don't quite understand the joke.
It isn't a joke. I only wish it were. I've seen you in my dreams. Sounds like a sentimental song, doesn't it? I've dreamt about you over and over again, Doctor.
That hardly turns you into a mental case. After all, recurring dreams are quite common.
But how did I come to dream about you? And I've never set eyes on you in my life.
He says he's seen them in his dreams, and he says somebody else will be joining them later, a pretty girl who needs money, and that ends up happening. And Dr. Van Straten is the cynical realist of the group, and he doesn't believe any of this, but all of the other guests are at least interested, and each of them have had an experience in their life that has been somewhat unexplainable, and so each of them tells their story, and that's what the stories are made up of.
Yeah. Although, I think the framing story was, like we said earlier, I don't think it was meant to be too twisty, just because, like you said, it's projected from the beginning. It's almost hammered into your head. It's what the characters discuss, is that he believes he's been here before, and that he knows bad things are going to happen after a certain time. Someone's going to break their glasses. All that's doled out bit by bit, but pretty heavy on in the beginning.
Yeah.
I feel like the purpose of the framing story in this is more the discussion of this. I thought interesting, because every time somebody tells a story, or every time he talks about what might happen and what comes up and what ends up happening, Dr. Van Straten always has like a scientific explanation for it. You recognize me because you must have seen me in my picture in the paper earlier, or, this person reminds you so much of a person who, you meant a lot to you in the past, and brings up that thing of that event. That's why you get these pictures. Honestly, these are even modern explanations for deja vu. And so I liked this sort of tension between, the movie doesn't commit to, hey, this is all supernatural. It seems to relish in batting it back and forth. And you do get this sense that it, like everybody else, is appropriately skeptical, but not nearly as skeptical as the doctor is, who just won't believe anything is supernatural at all.
Right.
But he's willing to entertain the stories and give his explanations. And I actually liked that bit of it. And so I thought the Wraparound Story was a little more sophisticated than you usually find in these kinds of movies.
Oh, I think it works really well as a wraparound. You're right. I agree. I mean, it is a story in itself. It doesn't feel superfluous. It's fine. And I did appreciate too that the other characters, like you said, are appropriately skeptical, but they're also curious because they've had these experiences that they can't really explain either. So they're at least open to the notion that maybe something could be going on, but they're not concerned or scared either. Like, oh, right, maybe, okay.
Well, you know, I mean, it just conjures up, and this is one thing I really like about this movie is, for me, movies are escapism, and I think another reason why I like these old movies is it conjures up a different time. It's like a window in the past, basically the contemporary past of when this movie was made, when people had a different way of entertaining themselves. You know, we weren't sitting around watching movies together. There was no television. You look back on it, and it's very quaint. And these, what would you call them, like parlor dramas, right? Where people spend their evenings sitting around the fire, drinking and smoking and just entertaining each other, trying to tell witty stories and trying to give witty, smart observations, but also being very polite and respectful of each other because you don't want to be rude and have a big argument. You just want to make sure that everybody is suitably entertained and nothing gets too tense. And that's what I kind of liked about this, and some of the stories that then therefore come about also show you a little bit more of what entertainment was like at this time. And so, I liked that. I really actually liked coming back to this framing story almost as much as the individual stories themselves, just to see how each of the participants would react and how they would treat each other,
right,
and discuss what they had just heard.
And I'll agree with you that is refreshing, because if this movie were made today, it would not be a group of intelligent adults sitting around telling these stories. It would be a group of too witty, too cynical, sexy 20-somethings telling these stories, and they would just be too witty for their own good. And this is a little bit more grounded. You know, these feel like normal, intelligent adults. Right.
Yeah.
You know, except for Sally, who is young, but just a young girl. That's it. But the first one to tell his story is Hugh, and he's the one who was a race car driver. He tells the story of how he wrecked his car in a race, and he was badly hurt, and he was hospitalized for some time. There's some cute banter between him and a nurse, which was giving me all kinds of shades of like Farewell to Arms. It's very Hemingway, you know, with the wounded male, you know, flirting with the cute nurse and blah,
sexually
blah.
harassing the nurse.
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, really inappropriate, but like, it was a more innocent time.
It was really expected at this time. Oh, man's in bed, cute nurse comes in, he's got to make a comment or two. I think it was, you know, check it off of every script from this era.
Both of my grandfathers served in the military. My mother's father served in World War II. He faced heavy combat. He was on the front lines. He didn't like to talk about it, but every once in a while he would tell a little story. And I remember I was very small, and I think that it was probably just me and my dad, because sometimes we would get up very, very early, like 3 or 4 in the morning during hunting season, and go out to his farm. And he, at that point, like, he wasn't too old to go out. He was just too old to care to go out. So he would get up in the morning, like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and make us breakfast. But then he would just send us off. But I remember one time, I don't remember the context of it all, and I wish I did. I lost him when I was in 7th grade, and I wish that I had the opportunity to talk to him more about these things. But I remember him telling a story about how he had been injured in combat, and he was in the field hospital, and he had been kind of flirting with this nurse. And I just remember that the punchline of the story, and I believe this story to be true, was that, you know, they had been kind of flirting, and then one evening he woke up and she was in bed with him. And that's the end of the story as I remember it. But
that's all he cared to tell you, your young ears, right?
He wasn't telling me, he was telling my dad, and I can only imagine that my dad maybe changed the subject quickly. I don't know. But thinking back on it now, I'm so charmed by that memory, and I wish I'd had more opportunity. But it's that kind of deal, and, you know, That's it. Like, it's just him in the hospital.
What is it then? Long past your bedtime.
Listen, darling, I put it to you. There's only one way to cure me permanently, and that's to marry me. It's your professional duty.
You've got a hope.
Then she leaves him alone in the hospital. It's like he hears something outside or something, and he goes and he opens the drapes of his windows, and he sees a funeral carriage, like an old-fashioned, like, horse-drawn funeral carriage down below. And he looks down, and the driver of the carriage looks up at him and says,
"Just room for one inside, sir."
Which kind of freaks him out, and he closes the drapes and goes back to his bed.
And he notices the time on the clock, too, is 4:15.
Well, and the time is passing very quickly.
Yeah.
Like, when he gets up, it's like 4:15 in the morning, but as soon as he goes back to bed, it's like 9 or so. Like, just bizarre, you know? Something's not right. Then he goes and sees a psychiatrist and tells him about seeing this funeral carriage, and the psychiatrist basically tells him that oftentimes when people are in life-threatening accidents or something like that, like, death ideation is a normal after effect. But when he leaves the psychiatrist, he goes to board a bus, and the porter on the bus turns to him, and it's the funeral driver, and he says, "We only have room for one more," which freaks him out. So he doesn't get on, and then he watches the bus drive away, and it drives off a bridge.
This double-decker English bus goes right off a bridge. It's not a bad little model, actually, to be honest. But
It looks pretty good. But that's it. Like, that's just his unexplained story, you know. And all of these stories are like that. They're all very simple and pretty brief. This is one of the briefer ones. But I feel that we will be able to recap them all almost as quickly as I did that one, because not really a whole lot happens. It's just kind of spooky situations, and they're anecdotal, and that's fine.
One other important thing was he asked a guy what time it was when he was standing in line. The guy said 4:15, so the time also matched. Yeah,
gotcha.
But you're right. I feel like they put the quicker stories at the beginning and save the longer stories toward the end, which is smart pacing, really. But these stories, some of them end really abruptly. Mm-hmm. But it makes its point and it moves on. It's like a very truncated Twilight Zone episode, really.
Yeah.
But like you said, these are anecdotal, so you know that in the story, that's not like they're going to die, you know.
Right.
And then I died. You know, that's not going to happen. So it's kind of clever how they, you know, are able to recount these while making them anecdotal.
It's funny that you say that, because actually, having just watched Tales from the Crypt, I wondered if maybe that this was some sort of purgatory or something, and they were all telling stories that actually resulted in their deaths, but they just were unaware. It's not. Yeah. But I did wonder.
Well, he also had mentioned earlier that a penniless brunette was going to come in at some point when everybody was asking. I'm sorry, I'm back to the Walter Craig at the Wraparound Story, and this woman does come in and mention that she didn't have any money left to pay the fare. What is her name? She is one of
She's married to one of them. Who is she?
Yeah.
She's Hugh's wife, Joyce.
That's right. So she comes in, and then, you know, Dr. Van Straten kind of explains that one away by saying it's a joke they're all playing on him, you know, and a bunch of them are denying it and whatever. And he's like, well, you know, who knows? It's just kind of a coincidence. The next story is Sally, and Sally seems like she's always kind of getting ready to leave. Maybe it's getting past her bedtime or something.
Yeah.
And she's kind of getting ready to go, and they're kind of encouraging her to go, but she ends up staying because she says that this reminds her of an incident that happened to her that freaked her out. So then we go to her story. And her story... Oh, by the way, did you look up who Sally was?
No.
Sally is Sally Ann Howes, and she is Truly Scrumptious from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Oh. That movie, that's a movie that we could do on the podcast. It's not a horror movie. It scared the shit out of me when I was a kid.
No, me too.
Oh my God.
I wanted to show that. I thought about showing that to my 4-year-old, and then I was like, no, I don't think that movie's ready. I don't think he's old enough yet.
I saw it in school. They showed it to us in school, and that child catcher gave me I was probably watching Nightmare on Elm Street at home, and then they showed me Chitty Chitty Bang Bang at school, and I was terrified.
I know. It was a terrifying movie for a kid. The child catcher in that, he's creepy. But it's kind of cute, actually. She actually died in December.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, she died in December, and apparently she was married to this man that was just the love of her life, and they were inseparable starting in the 70s. I guess her nephew or whoever said that as soon as he died, it was like she just went like 2 months later.
That happens a lot, I think.
She was cute, though, and I
Very
liked her
cute.
story. I liked her story, too. Her story
I liked her story. It's a classic ghost story.
Yeah.
It's just a classic ghost story. It's great.
She's at a Christmas party at a mansion, and it's a bunch of kids, and they're all running around, and they all have costumes on. It's so cute. And there's somebody playing the piano. It's just so interesting, this sort of child entertainment. And they say, one of the boys, I don't remember his name, says, "Hey, let's play sardines." And she's like, "What's sardines?" And he says, "Well, it's like hide and seek. Who wants to be it?" And she's like, "Oh, I'll run and hide." So she runs off and hides, and the kids all count. And she goes upstairs kind of to the landing and gets behind a curtain in front of a window. And this boy is the first one to find her. And he...
Got you!
It's all right. I'll go quietly.
Shh! Now, I'll stop here with you. When somebody else finds us, they pack in too, like sardines.
Oh, it's cold in here.
Colder? That better?
Mm.
Yet this kid is still kind of trying to mac on her as well.
Yeah.
And
In
that
a
was
very
also cute.
1940s innocent way, it's cute. It's very youthful and flirty.
It is. And
it's cute.
And she's being very debonair, and she's like, she stands up, and it's like, well, he's like, "Wait a minute, I have a better place." And I'm like, "Yeah, I bet you sure do." And they run upstairs to like the attic. Oh, his name is Jimmy, I think. And he tells her that there was a horrible murder that happened in this mansion and in this very spot, that a boy was found with his head cut off, and his sister or some girl had cut his throat or something. She kind of runs around and he runs out. I don't remember exactly how it ends up, but she ends up going deeper into the attic, and there's like a door that's down this old hallway that looks like it hasn't been used in a while.
It's behind a wardrobe. I thought that was kind of interesting. Like I don't remember if she moved the wardrobe or if like she opened the wardrobe and there was a hidden door inside. But it was kind of hidden away, and when she goes in, at first I thought like a bedroom. She later describes it as a nursery, which makes sense.
Little
and
kids
again,
room,
like
basically.
yeah, like I said, it's just classic ghost story stuff. It's great.
Yeah, and it's this little boy who's crying, sitting on a chair, and he says his name is Francis Kent, and he's upset, and he says, "Oh, I thought you were my sister, Constance."
I didn't notice her either. All the other girls seem much younger than me. I wish you were my sister. You're so kind and nice. Why? Is she unkind to you, darling? She hates me. She said she'd like to kill me. Oh, don't. You poor little thing.
She tucks him into bed at night, sings him a song, and walks out. In the meantime, the kids are downstairs, and they're all together getting ready to eat, and they're like, "Wait a minute, where is she?" And he's like, "Oh, I need to run back up and find her." So she comes down as he goes back up. And I swear, as she leaves the room, I don't know if it was just a portrait or what, but I thought I saw a girl in the background of that room. I
did not notice, but I did read that, yes, she is kind of lingering in the background.
Yeah, I did a bit of a double take, and I was like, "Ooh, that was creepy." But I wrote it off as a portrait that had been like set on the ground. Anyway, she comes downstairs, and she explains to the house mom or whatever that, she met the boy, Kent, upstairs. She's like, "What are you talking about?" And she's told by them that Francis Kent was murdered by his sister, Constance. And then it ends.
Yep,
that's it. You kind of want a little bit more, right? Like, oh, are they all going to rush upstairs to find the room is empty, or what's going to happen? But no, it just ends right there. That's a little disappointing. I think that's a weakness of this story, is that it doesn't feel satisfying conclusion.
Well, yeah, but at the same time, I feel like that is typical of older ghost stories, where it's just like, she's been dead for 50 years.
It's like urban legend, scary stories to tell in the dark kind of material, right?
Right. Which is cute, and
it is.
That's one of the stories that was cut for the American release, which I don't know how they made those decisions, because I found that story to be one of the more charming ones.
Yeah.
Apparently, that's not the ghost part, obviously, but the murder was based on a true story. This teenage girl murdered her toddler brother. I think he was like 4 or something like that. And well, she confessed to the murder. And then I guess there were all kinds of theories that maybe she had been coerced into confessing, or she had confessed to protect somebody else in her family or something like that. But it's kind of an unsolved thing. I don't know. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. And then we dive back into the wraparound story. And I thought they did something kind of cute here because Craig mentions that, oh, by the way, like Sally is going to get whisked away here.
Well, he says he doesn't remember exactly what happens, but all he remembers is that at some point he hits Sally really hard. He says, but I don't understand how that could happen because you're going to leave soon. Mm-hmm. And then she does. Her mother shows up and whisks her away, and her mother is hilarious.
Her mother is funny, but they try to short circuit it, right? They say, oh, well, then this is going to break the spell, or as one person says, then we're just going to insist that Sally stays. And she's like, all right, then I'm staying. And like you said, her mother comes in and just very insistently says, oh, you got to get going. You got to get going. You got a party to get to tomorrow or something like that. And she won't take no for an answer. So she whisks her away. So that ends up coming true.
Yeah.
And that's cute. You're right. Her mother is hilarious.
but there's still kind of the mystery because he says he knows that he hits her, but now she's gone. So
yeah,
like is she going to come back? I didn't know what was going on. But then it jumps right into Joan's story immediately.
I think the movie kind of does an interesting subversion here because you've gotten 2 stories that are still, I mean, they're sinister, but they're still pretty light in tone. And I feel like this 3rd story took a turn for the dark.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. I mean, you've said a couple of times now, Twilight Zone, and the old original Twilight Zone. That is very much what this reminds me of, spooky and creepy, but tame.
Well, and a variety.
And a variety, yes.
There were Twilight Zone episodes that were just like comedic.
Yes.
And we get some of that here too later.
And there were some that were, more sci-fi, and there were some that were more horror. Like there was a variety. I've always liked the Twilight Zone. I haven't seen the most recent iteration. Every 10, 20 years they revive it, and I remember watching it in the 80s, and I liked it then. So it's not that I don't like this type of stuff, and it's really not even that I don't like this movie. I just didn't love it.
Yeah.
But Joan's story, again, really not anything that you haven't seen before. It's about a haunted mirror. There are, my goodness, how many movies and stories have we read about haunted mirrors? A bazillion. Okay, so she bought her husband this old mirror for his birthday, and they hang it up in their bedroom, and when they both initially look in it together, he kind of acts like he sees something strange in it, but they just brush it off. But then, when he's alone, he looks into the mirror and he sees himself reflected in it, but the mirror reflects and shows him in an unfamiliar room. It is not the room that he's in.
Not at all. The room he's in is very plain.
Oh, yes. Little to nothing on the walls. It's basically just a bed in a room. But the room that was reflected back is ornate. Like, it looks like a room in a old mansion or a castle or something. It's got a very heavy 4-poster canopied bed and like a dressing table and
paneled walls, fireplace.
Oh yeah, fireplace, all kinds of ornate decorations and furnishings. And the first time he sees it, he kind of does the thing that people do in movies and probably in real life. He squeezes his eyes closed real tight and kind of rubs them, and he opens his eyes and it's gone. But he tells Joan about it at dinner. They just shrug it off. But he sees it again later that night, and when he tries to make it go away, it won't. And then Joan is like narrating the story. She says, well, and then some time went by. We were really busy planning our wedding, and we were looking for a new house. But she says Peter all along was acting strange and kind of irritable.
He calls her a nag at one point.
Yeah. Uncharacteristically, like he just kind of, she says something, I mean, not offensive at all, and he just snaps at her, and she calls him on it, and he apologizes, and he just says, I haven't been sleeping well. And he tells her what's going on with the mirror, and he says now it's gotten worse, and he sees it every night, and he can't make it go away. And he says, and I feel like there's something, like the mirror is trying to draw me in. He says it's like there's something waiting for me on the other side, something evil. She offers to get rid of it, which would be an easy solution.
Excellent idea, yeah.
But he's like, oh, no, I'm sure it's just in my head. But maybe we should postpone the wedding.
I love that. He's like something about, maybe you should just divorce me now or whatever. And she says, look, she says my favorite line in this movie.
I loved it.
Really, darling, you're going a little bit too fast for me. Let's get the wedding over and then we can start making divorce arrangements afterwards.
Yeah. That was a great line.
But she kind of cures him of it, or at least they think that she's cured him of it, because she says, look, describe it to me. And he describes, there's the 4-poster, there's the whatever, it has the vines running up the top of it, carved into the posts and blah, 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 blah. And she says, well, come over here and look at it with me in there. And the thing is, he can't see her in the mirror, even when she's standing right next to him. But she holds his hand, and that somehow seems to kind of break the spell.
Yep.
And when she holds his hand, suddenly he can see the room again.
The actual room, not the ghost room or whatever.
Right, the actual room. So at this point, the reason they don't get rid of the mirror, I think, is he thinks that they've gotten over it, they've solved it, and it's all in his mind anyway. This is another story, I think, where he's going to see a psychologist, right? And the psychologist is trying to explain away what's going on. Just says your mental state is weird right now because of blah, blah, blah. I don't remember the reason he gives, but...
Oh, well, they're getting married, they're moving, there's all kinds of change going on.
Yeah.
They get married, and they move to a new house and take the mirror with them. And she's going on a trip to visit her mother, and she wants him to go with her, and tries to convince him to go with her, but he won't. And once she's gone, the ghostly room is back when he looks in the mirror. And while she's away visiting her mother, I don't know if her mother lives in the same city. It doesn't matter. But she happens to walk by the shop where she got the mirror. And looking in the window, she notices that the bed from the ghostly room, which he had described to her in detail, she notices that it's in there. And so she goes and she talks to the shop owner about it, and she asks about the mirror, and she asks about the bed. And he's like, funny, you should ask, because they both came from the same estate. And the shop holder says that they both belong to the same guy, and this guy was disabled in an accident, and then he went crazy because he believed his wife was being unfaithful. And so he strangled his wife and killed her, and then sat down in front of the mirror and slit his own throat.
Yeah.
Which freaks her out.
Appropriately so. And
right.
This is framed really well. By the way, the cinematography in this movie, the lighting, everything is really good. And I love the way that this is framed, because as he's standing and talking to her and she's sitting there and the camera's slowly dollying in on them, you see the portrait of this guy who he's talking about, this 1836 guy or whatever, between them, kind of staring between them at them as he's telling the story. It's like a little shadow hanging over him telling the story. It's suitably creepy, I think. But yeah, she returns home, and he is not himself. He is sitting there, and he's talking about how he's been, stuck in this room, and, you were gone. Oh, I know I know why you were gone. You were gone to see, I don't know, so-and-so. He basically accuses her of being unfaithful. He goes crazy. And he says he's going to end things, and he picks up his scarf or something and stands up and starts to strangle her. And so they have a tussle in front of the mirror, and she grabs a candlestick and swings it at the mirror and shatters the mirror, which breaks the spell. Mm-hmm. And then she walks over and kind of like starts to somewhat gingerly pull the mirror apart.
and she talks about it's all rotten. Like the wood behind the frame is all rotten and stuff. And
well, yeah, I was just like, "Ooh, careful, don't cut yourself."
Well, right, but I guess in an interview decades later, she talked about how she only had one take to do this because it was not within their budget to replace the mirror and do it again. And so she said, I just went to town on it. Which I thought was great. But the spell is broken, and that's, again, That's it. That's the end of the story.
Yeah, but after this, I think that the interstitial, like, visibly gets darker.
It does.
It's darker outside, but like I said, this story is a little darker, and it clearly, they're moving towards a more dark tone overall with the movie.
In this very brief, back to the frame story, very briefly, Van Straten is still very skeptical and has a rational explanation for everything. But Walter is the paranoid guy is scared, and he wants to leave. He feels like leaving is the only way that he can break the spell or whatever it is. But Van Straten says that he should stay or else the delusion wins. Mm-hmm. And as Walter's trying to leave, Elliott kind of sidesteps him and gets him to stay by launching into his story. And you said that, at this point the movie is getting darker, but then this story, Elliott's story,
is a comedy.
It's comedy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's kind of a classic ghost story, but it's a comic ghost story.
Well, and this is also pretty typical of a lot of the anthology, not a lot, but many of the anthologies we've seen, where suddenly they'll throw a comedic thing in to sort of lighten the mood a little bit. And I suppose the idea is that they're creating some balance, or things are getting a little too frightening for the audience, so we need to lighten it up a little bit before we end it.
Well, I mean, it is typical of anthology film and anthology series, because you kind of never know what you're going to get. It's always a hodgepodge of things. And sometimes they'll be dark and serious, and sometimes they'll be light and comedic. I mean, Tales from the Crypt was like that too, and that was one of the things that I liked about it. Sometimes those episodes were really funny. And this one is funny, but again, it's just so old school that I think it's just kind of before my time. I mean, it's not as farcical, but it's a little bit kind of like Abbott and Costello kind of stuff.
It is, and it's also very much, I think, a product of its time, because it's actually a reference to some well-known characters from another movie.
Well, these two actors, I think, were known for playing two other characters. Like, they worked together and had kind of this character duo. And I think that they are playing basically their famous roles. They just changed the names to avoid like copyright infringement or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, they were like obsessed with cricket, and they were characters on the train in The Lady Vanishes, the 1938 Alfred Hitchcock version. And they have played those characters, sometimes under different names, sometimes obsessed with a different sport, but the same guys essentially playing the same characters in lots of different movies and even on stage. So this would be a reference that nobody today would get, but maybe people of the time would have been charmed by. And so they maybe knew what they were getting instantly. It's sort of this goofy, silly story about these two guys who are obsessed with golf and both rapidly fall in love with the same woman.
Right, they're best friends, but then this beautiful woman, Mary, comes in between them, and they are both smitten with her, and she's smitten with both of them and can't decide which one to pick, so they decide that they will play a round of golf, and whoever wins her, and she's like, yes, that's a perfect idea.
She's thrilled with it. They might as well flip a coin, but yeah.
Right? So they play golf, and they get to the last hole, and it's very close. George wins, but Larry thinks that he cheated. And so he just walks into the water hazard and drowns himself.
Just slowly walks into the lake until he's under the water, and just his hat is floating into the top.
Yep, just casually. Nobody says anything. Nobody tries to stop him. Like, oh, guess he's dead now. Okay, so then Mary is with George, and George is out playing golf before they get married, and he hears Larry's voice by the water hazard.
Oh, yes. It's me, all right. I've returned from my watery grave to haunt you.
And then there's a very comedic scene where the ghost is like messing with the golf ball, and these, I will say terrible effects only because they're a product of their time. I mean, for the time, fine. But like the ball is floating around, and like the actor is acting like he's trying to swing his golf club, but something is like preventing him, like some ghostly force is holding on to his club. And then the golf ball, like they do this hilarious thing where the two actors on screen like just track the golf ball with their eyes, like swinging in a big circle, and then it lands right back in front of him. It's really funny. And then eventually, Larry appears to George in the lodge saying that he'll haunt him forever. He'll go away under 2 conditions: that he leave Mary and that he give up golf.
And he's all ready to leave Mary. Well, I guess that's what I got to do. But he's like, give up golf. And he just like throws his chair backwards and goes crazy. I might as well be dead. Which
it's really
I
funny.
found hilarious, actually.
It was really funny. And then George is basically like, listen, come on. I realize that what I did to you was bad, but we were friends forever. Cut me a break. And Larry's like, you know what? You're right. I'll leave you alone. And he tries to disappear, but he can't. Like, he says he can't remember how.
Like what gestures he has to use or something, yeah.
Yeah, and it's all very silly and slapsticky, but George is trying to help him, and of course, like the bartender sees him and he looks ridiculous and looks crazy. And Larry says, well, I guess if I can't disappear, I'm just going to be with you forever, and I have to be within 6 feet of you. That's the rules. So George and Mary get married, and then they're on their honeymoon, and Larry's just there, like sitting on the couch next to them, encouraging George to get romantic with Mary, but like George can't because like his friend is just sitting there on the couch with them.
It's funny. I mean, he's like
kissing
is funny.
Her.
He's covering his eyes while George is kissing her. And then he's like, oh, come on, this is crazy. And she's like, well, I think it's about time for me to turn in for the night. And he's like, yeah, I guess it's time for me to turn in too. So they start to walk towards the bedroom door. And of course, Larry is following right behind them. And George is like, come on, man, you can't come in here. And he's like, sorry, man, I don't make the rules. It's 6 feet. Then he says something to kind of trick him. And Larry kind of stands there and isn't paying attention. George goes into the room further than 6 feet, shuts the door. Suddenly, Larry disappears. And immediately, George and Larry come walking out of the room again because he reappeared apparently right next to George. It was funny. I really liked this byplay, actually.
It was funny. It was cute. George tries to help Larry figure out how to disappear and accidentally makes himself disappear. So Larry's like, oh man, what do I do? Well, I guess I go to bed with Mary. And he walks towards the bedroom. End of story.
Yeah.
Oh, funny. Back to the frame story. Van Straten tells Walter that if something horrible were to have happened, it should have already happened because all of the things that Walter had predicted have already come true. And if they've already come true, then the evil should have already happened or whatever.
Yeah.
So Van Straten tells his story, which, again, is very typical. We've seen this story before, but I thought that it was well done here. I think that maybe this one was my favorite one.
This is the first time we've really seen this story. This was the inspiration for countless stories like it afterwards, movies and stories as well. So
like Magic with Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah, it's very groundbreaking, I think.
There are a bunch of them. But it's okay, so Van Straten tells this story. There was this guy named Maxwell Frere who was a ventriloquist who was accused of attempted murder. Van Straten, being a doctor, is called in to examine him, and Frere says before he'll talk, he wants his dummy back. And so the police give Van Straten this statement from a guy named Key, who it turns out was the guy that Frere tried to murder, but I don't know if we know that initially.
Mm-hmm.
Through the statement, we find out that Key went to see Frere perform, and Frere is a very popular, very well-known ventriloquist, and he's doing his thing with Hugo the dummy, but you can just kind of tell from the beginning that the dummy is rogue.
Yeah.
That Frere is really not in control of what the dummy does or says, and he kind of just has to roll with it.
He's sort of sweating it, and I actually, God, I thought the acting was fantastic in this one.
The guy who plays Frere does a really good job.
Yeah, he's Michael Redgrave, Vanessa Redgrave's father.
I didn't know that.
Sir Michael Redgrave. Back when it was pretty rare to actually be knighted for acting. He's kind of a peer of Laurence Olivier and those folks. I mean, he is well decorated, very, very famous acting dynasty family. So I was totally taken in by his thing, and I also felt like at times it was a little nebulous. I feel like I'm watching a horror movie. I expect this to be supernatural. But I'm still not quite sure if the dummy itself has its own personality or if he still is sort of like himself maybe like has kind of a multi-personality thing, and he's kind of a psychological thing. You know, I found myself in the psychologist's shoes for the first time, kind of arguing for the rational explanation as I was watching this.
Yeah, and I think that it's intentionally a little bit ambiguous, especially at the end. Mm-hmm. What happens is the ventriloquist and the dummy are conversing with people in the audience, and when they talk to this guy, Key, it turns out that Key is also a ventriloquist, and Hugo, the dummy, immediately takes interest in him and starts saying, like, maybe I'll leave this dumbass and join you. And Key, you know, plays along like, yeah, okay, whatever. And then it seems like the dummy goes totally rogue. Like, they're supposed to sing a song, and the dummy refuses to sing, and Frere is, like, visibly anxious. Like, he's sweating and clearly nervous. And he eventually just retreats off stage. And then the dummy peeks back out from behind the curtain and is like, hey, Key, come see me back in my dressing room. We've got to talk or whatever. So Key does go back there to talk to him. And at first, he hears the dummy talking to him, and Frere is nowhere to be found. And the dummy says a couple of things to him before he locates where the dummy is sitting.
Glad to see you, Sylvester. Mix yourself a drink. And let's get down to business, eh?
And when he locates where the dummy is sitting, he doesn't say anything more at that point. And Frere comes out of the bathroom, and Key's like, oh, you'll have to teach me that trick. And the guy's like, oh, did he talk to you? What did he say? And Key's like, oh, ha ha, very funny. But then later, Frere is out at the bar, presumably of this hotel that they're staying at or whatever. And he's drunk, and he's just got the dummy sitting there next to him. And these women come in with this guy, and it seems like they are a little boozy too, and they recognize Frere, and one of them goes over and starts messing with the dummy a little bit, and the dummy says some obnoxious things to her, and she's offended and goes back and tells the guy that she's with, you know, go defend my honor or whatever. And he does. He goes over to Frere and starts, you know, threatening him, and the dummy continues to say insulting things. So this guy gets up in Frere's face, but Key kind of gets in between them and gets them away and takes Frere upstairs to his room. And Frere is completely drunk. He puts him in bed, covers him up, sits the dummy on the bed with him, and then he goes back to his room. In the middle of the night, there's frantic knocking on his door, and he opens it up, and it's Frere. And he's like, where is he? I know you have him. And Key's like, I don't know what you're talking about. But eventually Frere's like looking around the room, and he finds Hugo the dummy. And Key is obviously surprised, like he has no idea how he got there. But Frere is incensed, picks up the dummy, but then pulls a gun?
Yeah.
And shoots Key several times.
Yeah. Thought he was dead.
Yeah. So then Van Staden, after reading this, wants to talk to Frere again. And so he goes to his jail cell, and he brings Hugo with him. And at first, Frere is afraid of the dummy. Like, he gets up and, like, retreats into a corner of the room. But they lock the dummy in there with him. And Van Staden watches them talk to one another. And the dummy is really mean. Like, talking about how he's going to leave Frere in there to rot. And he's going to go find Key. And they're going to have a great career. And maybe they'll visit him in the loony bin or whatever. Mm-hmm. As Van Staden's watching and eventually calling for the orderlies, Frere tries to smother Hugo and eventually stomps his head. And then apparently some time passes, and Van Staden brings Key, the guy who was shot, to visit Frere, hoping that seeing him will cure him or something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's a little nebulous, isn't it? What's going on there?
We see that since the stomping of the dummy, Frere has been catatonic. He's just sitting in a bed staring off into space. They try to talk to him, and when Frere realizes that it's Key that's there to see him, he starts talking to him, but he has this frozen kind of smile on his face, and when he talks, it's Hugo's voice.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't know, like either Hugo has possessed, for lack of a better word, Frere, or there was some psychological, maybe if you know, your theory is correct, maybe it was psychological all the time. Maybe it was like a split personality kind of deal.
It's a very well-constructed bit, because there's never a moment where the dummy talks like where the dummy's mouth is moving, the dummy's being animated, where Frere doesn't have his hands on it.
We never see it. I mean, the dummy talks to Key
when he first comes into the room, but he doesn't move his mouth. His mouth isn't moving,
or at least we don't see it. We don't see him talking at all. We just hear it.
Yeah,
so you're right.
Exactly.
We never see him animated. We never see him animated if the other guy isn't touching him.
Exactly. So it's still a little nebulous exactly what's going on. I want to believe it was a possessed dummy, but gosh, Redgrave really sells this one, man. He really sells it. And it's I think, very naturalistic acting, actually. He's just sweating up bullets, and you just see his breakdown. He's drunk at one point, he's just nervous. He just doesn't even seem to be there. Like his mind is on other things. Fantastic acting. And we can't talk about this episode without mentioning Beulah, the character of Beulah.
Oh, yeah.
Who is actually an African-American actress in a shockingly progressive role for a person of color at this time, who are normally relegated to dumb little comedic roles or
like
servants.
mammy roles, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she is like the owner of this club or something. She's like super successful, or she's a singer in there. She talks with a couple,
glamorous,
very glamorous, standing here right next to these A-list actors, holding her own. She gets a bit of a song number in there. It's actually kind of clever. Like, she starts singing a song, and I thought, oh, this is charming. Are we going to be treated to an entire musical number in the middle of this? But, after about a minute of that, then it cuts to that whole scene that happens in Frere's dressing room. And it's like the length of that scene is the length of her song. Mm-hmm. You can hear it faintly in the background the whole time. And then by the time they come out, it cuts back to her, and she finishes the tune. Mm-hmm. It's really, really cute, clever. I think the whole...
And very progressive for 1945. Like incredibly progressive.
This woman got really lucky. I mean, don't get me wrong, she's very talented, but even that didn't often matter. And she had a lot of big roles in screen and on stage, and lived a much better life as an African-American actress than most of her peers at this time. So, and this movie was one of her first big roles where she did that. And even reviews at the time kind of mentioned how she was a bright star in this film. So
kudos to her, and kudos to the filmmakers. That's great. Cool. And then it goes back to the frame story where everything pays off. Van Staden breaks his glasses, as was predicted. The lights dim, as was predicted. And Walter says, "It started." And then for some reason he requests to be left alone with Van Staden, like he just wants to talk to him alone. And
they're all like, okay.
Okay. And so they all leave. Walter, I don't know, he talks a little bit, but basically he's like, I knew this was going to happen. It was inevitable. And now I have an urge to kill you. And he strangles him with something. And then he starts running through the house, but actually what he runs through is all the stories, which is really kind of cool. Like he runs through these scenarios that we had seen. So he runs through the Christmas party, and as he's running through the Christmas party, he bumps into Sally, who starts screaming, and so he punches her and knocks her out, as he predicted he would earlier in the movie. He runs through, I think, all of them, but he ends up in the cell, Frere's cell from the last story, and Hugo is in there, but this time Hugo is played by what must be a little person or a child. So he's definitely wearing some sort of dummy head mask, but he gets up and walks towards him and hovers over him, and then Hugo
That's creepy.
It was very creepy. Hugo starts strangling him, and then all of a sudden you hear the sound of an alarm clock, and Walter wakes up in his bed, in his home. His wife is there, and immediately he gets a telephone call from a guy named Elliott asking him to come do a consultation at Pilgrim's Farm. And Walter says to his wife, I wonder why that sounds so familiar. And then it just cuts back to the opening scene where you see his car approaching the estate, and you see him stop in front of it and look at it quizzically, and then the end comes up on the screen. And that's it. I mean, like, it was obvious that was going to happen. But at the same time, it was a little satisfying to actually see it play out.
Well, interestingly enough, an odd bit of trivia is that this movie directly inspired 3 mathematicians and astronomers to come up with the steady state theory of the universe. These guys are Thomas Gold, Fred Hoyle, and Herman Bondi, who were discussing with one another, hey, wait a minute. Did you see that movie, Dead of Night? Maybe this is how the universe really is. It's constantly in a steady state and just looping back on itself. And from a physics perspective, the idea is that although the universe is expanding, matter is constantly being created and forming new galaxies, so that the average number of galaxies in any part of the universe is approximately the same. Really interesting. I don't know how much credence that's given nowadays, but to think that this horror movie inspired this notion is kind of cute.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, when all is said and done, and gosh, this happens all the time, and I always feel kind of stupid and redundant saying it, but talking it out with you makes me appreciate it even more. I do appreciate it for what it is. I think that it's good storytelling, charming storytelling, a different style of acting, but well done nonetheless. I'm not going to watch it again. I don't know that I would necessarily recommend it to my friends, but it was not a waste of my time. It's an interesting kind of charming piece of nostalgia that, you know, gives you a window into a different time. And I do love these anthology movies, and if this in any way paved the way for those movies that I love, then I am grateful for that. And so I'm not mad about it. You know, I didn't hate it. I'm not mad at you for picking it. Not my cup of tea, but I get it. I get why it's been well received. I get why it has a following. I understand why you picked it. I'll go as far as to say it's a good movie.
It is good. I mean, it's definitely good. I mean, technically, it's great. Seriously, the cinematography, the lighting is very moody. It's very well done, very well thought out. The acting is top-notch, even though it's a different style of acting than we're used to. These are all beautiful people doing a fantastic job. And highly influential. We rattled off a whole bunch of ways that this movie influenced the movies that came after it. You remember that movie Triangle that took place on that boat?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
This movie directly inspired Christopher Smith, who wrote and directed that movie, for its concept. Martin Scorsese puts this as like number 5 on his list of the 11 scariest horror movies. I don't know how that could be, but I think what he probably means is just movies that he thinks have a deep impact or impacted him. So yeah, it's very well respected, I think, for very good reason. And I found it enjoyable to watch, and I'm glad we watched the long version. But I would say I was ready for it to be done by the time it was done.
Yeah.
And I thought that, like you said, the last one was definitely the best. It was the most complex and most interesting. It was the one that had me guessing the most, wondering where it was going to go and whether this was supernatural or whether this was just a freaky guy. And just ventriloquist dummies. They're just creepy.
Yep.
Yeah, really enjoyed it, and I'm glad this could be a dive way back into the past, a bit of the origins of our horror anthology series. Coming up, we have one more selected for you that's definitely going to be a bit more modern.
Yeah.
And we hope you've enjoyed what we've been doing this month. If you do enjoy it, please find us online. Just Google Two Guys and a Chainsaw. Find our website, find our Facebook page, our Twitter feed. Let us know what you think. Let us know some anthologies we should review. We will come back and revisit this topic from time to time.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
There's a lot of them out there. Until next time, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With Two Guys and a Chainsaw.